All righty.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Our other panelist, Michelle, might be joining us in a little bit, but this is Ask an Auditor and Compliance Geek by StrikeGraph and Geels Norton. We're turning this into a regular series every month to engage community members and both channel partners and clients, etc., and everyone who really needs access to compliance and all of the questions that go with it. So, Nick, I'd love for you to go ahead and take some time to introduce yourself, and then we can jump into some of the most common questions that auditors are asked. I have some just from our own research and that our own clients ask frequently, and then I'd love for you to dive into some of the things that you hear a lot on your end.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Kalani. Nick Norton, co-founder and chief visionary at Geels Norton. We are a very high-touch CPA firm focusing on SOC 2 examinations, and also we are a preferred assessor for Microsoft's supplier privacy and security assurance program. And our goal is really to challenge the status quo of what a traditional CPA firm is, meaning that we spend a lot of time hand-holding with our clients, helping them understand the true value of a compliance initiative beyond just checking out that box, so actually becoming a more secure company, becoming a scalable company, implementing operations that align with security needs based on that company. So very much a partner with all of our clients and not just that auditor. And we're really here to help them succeed long-term as they grow and pursue their goals.
That's great. I'd love for you to, so StrikeGraph is a compliance technology SaaS platform that is a little bit earlier downstream from the work that Geels Norton does and works very closely with auditors of all stripes in helping companies automate compliance and get their SOC 2 or their ISO certifications, et cetera. How have you in the past worked with the technology solutions that a potential client may be using? At what stage does an auditor enter the conversation? Do I need to be thinking about auditors first? Do I need to be thinking about software first? Where do I kind of start?
The auditor should always be involved in discussions from the start. Every audit firm is going to be, so I get these technology platforms to StrikeGraph, they're really supplemental or complementary to the audit process. And so you want to be able to understand as a customer going through their SOC 2 audit, how is the auditor going to be using the platform? What are the actual efficiencies that can be gained? How can we use those platforms to be organized and actually build a scalable security program? And so we always like to be in those discussions right from the start so we can help hold our hands with our clients and show them how they can best use the platforms.
That's great. One of the most common questions, Nick, that we hear is, where do you start in your journey from a company maturity stage, right? So sometimes it's, okay, what are all the elements and teams I need to work with? And other times it's a question of what are all of the stages that I need to consider in the development of my company? What recommendations and answers do you have for clients when they're trying to determine when it is the right time to make compliance a priority?
Absolutely. Compliance and compliance initiatives should be thought of from the start. If you're entering an industry that compliance is highly valued, and anyone in the technology, SaaS, service industry, especially B2B, that is going to be a critical thing and when you help protect your customer and your customer's data. Think of it from the start. Become educated. Understand what are the different compliance requirements out there. What does that mean for our organization? How much formality is going to need to be implemented into our organizational structure from an operational standpoint, oversight standpoint, security standpoint, etc., and to know those expectations from the start. And then from there, try to anticipate when are you going to need to go through these initiatives. So is not having a SOC 2 going to be a barrier of entry to working with some of your target customers, target clients? Do you have some current customers or clients that are requesting or going to be requiring that you demonstrate SOC 2 or a similar compliance initiative? And so if your advancement in revenue growth is going to be held back from demonstrating very sound security practices, then think about this sooner the better.
Thank you. What would you say is, and just following up on the timing and maturity company stage, do you have examples of companies who got that wrong, right? Companies who waited too long or who started too early? And what are some guidelines for people who could then maybe ensure that they don't fall into that same trap?
Absolutely. And as far as, I'll answer the second part of that first, the guidelines. The key piece is just become educated. Talk to auditors, talk to folks in the industry. What are general expectations of compliance initiatives or SOC 2 and ISO? What does the journey look like? What's the timetable, etc.? We have had certain clients that we've been working with, and they simply weren't ready yet. There were, as far as prioritizing initiatives, there were other initiatives that came before their SOC 2 compliance initiative, and they didn't have the time and resources to dedicate, and it became a very stressful process as compared to a very beneficial process for their company's growth. So I think it's important for companies to understand that I always say that SOC 2 is a double-edged sword. On one edge, SOC 2 is going to force companies to grow up very fast and mature more quickly than they would otherwise. There's also another side of that. As a startup, you're used to the flexibility, the kind of chaotic nature of a startup life. Well, SOC 2 is going to make sure that becomes much more formalized, that your practices are much more mature and streamlined. And so for some startups, that is a hard concept to grasp, that, we have to actually act like a grown-up company now to get to that next level. Kalani, are you still there? Well, she logs back in. From the other side too, is that we also work with, or have worked with a lot of clients who they wish they had started their compliance journey sooner. So if you can begin from the start with a very solid foundation and make sure that you're building solid practices from the ground up, as you scale as a company, it's going to be much more of a success and actually building upon very well thought of scalable practices instead of trying to go back and change bad habits from the past.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for covering me when I kind of dropped off. I really appreciate how you're kind of structuring a lot of the pitfalls. I know there's a lot of anxiety associated with the cost. And we see this in all of the marketing research as well, Nick. And I know you see this in your current clients. How do you make the business case for the ROI of a compliance investment? And I think the follow-up question is, most people really want to know, what is the budget? What am I thinking? What am I ballparking? Which is also probably a good time for you to maybe distinguish the cost of a SOC 2 type 1 versus a SOC 2 type 2, and are there ways to stagger the costs, etc. But this entire bucket of budget, ROI, cost is where we see a lot of the anxiety-inducing components of compliance, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Absolutely, that's a lot of questions in there. Let me try to start from the top. If your SOC 2 or any other compliance initiative is entered into and looked at as a pure expense and not an investment, then the outcome of that initiative is not going to be nearly as productive, impactful than if you looked at it as a long-term investment of the company. SOC 2 is going to require some major org changes, operational changes, security changes to help grow the company up. And that is a pure investment from monetarily speaking, resource speaking, time speaking, etc. The other piece that I am always very upfront with all of our clients and prospective clients with is, like anything in this world, you get what you pay for. And so I have full respect for organizations who they're trying to get through SOC 2 ASAP, and cost is the number one priority. And there are low-cost providers out there who help kind of just check off that box and move on. We have a very distinguished approach of Geels Norton is that's not us. So the true value that we believe in a compliance initiative or SOC 2 process is actually understanding what are your organizational risks, how do you mitigate those risks, where's the org going as far as growth, who's your target market, what kind of data are you protecting and processing, then how can we help build a security program around all of that that also happens to comply with your SOC 2 requirements. In taking that approach, yes, it costs significantly more money. However, the outcome and the output in the long-term impact is exponentially greater. There will be low-cost providers in the market that will offer introductory prices to SOC 2. I've seen in the 10 to 12K range. We will not work with a client for anything but about double that. So our baseline for market entry is $20,000 for type 1 examinations for basic SaaS companies. And more importantly on price is we really vet our prospects on what are you guys trying to achieve here? Is it just check off that box and kind of ignore the opportunity to advance in other areas? If that's the case, we'll probably pass on the opportunity. If they see this as a great opportunity as a business to take that next step forward and grow a much more mature security program, then that aligns much more with our values. And so we want to work with folks that align with us. From there, depending on firm size as well, I came from a top 6 firm previously in the US. You're looking more of baseline pricing that's 40K-ish to start up to the 6 figures. And so as companies become more complex and or prefer a big firm name, then there is significant cost increases associated with that. The other piece of your question, Kalani, was related to how to spread out these costs. Typically, as a company enters the SOC 2 world, they'll start with a type 1 SOC 2 examination. This looks simply at the design of your controls as of a specific date. So it's a little more flexible and easier to get into than jumping right into a type 2 SOC 2 examination, which is looking at the operating effectiveness of your controls over a period of time. And so your controls need to be in place. We won't go less than 3 months, maximum of 1 year, that we're going to be auditing were your controls actually successful throughout that period of time. Some organizations, when they're getting requests from customers or prospective customers, they're receiving requests of getting a type 2 SOC 2 right off the bat. Others are getting requests that we need to do this in the next year. For those getting the type 2 right off the bat, there's 2 options that we'll take. One is we'll go through a readiness assessment or a pre-assessment to help assess how the controls are looking right now, how they're designed, are all of those controls in place? If they're designed well, are they in a good spot to operate effectively once their audit period begins? In those circumstances, the readiness piece is a lower cost than an actual examination, so it gives a good opportunity to get through we call it a mock audit and understand what's the audit process, who are the auditors' expectations, and lets them enter that shorter type 2 initial period on a much more comfortable, stress-free, realistic expectation scenario. The alternative there is to start off with a type 1 exam immediately. And with that type 1 exam, you may not have the type 2 to give to your customers right off the bat, but you actually do have an audit report to provide to prospective customers or current customers. And then after that type 1, the type 2 period kicks off, and you can do your type 2 3 months to 12 months thereafter. That's going to be a more expensive scenario because you're doing 2 examinations really within the same budget cycle. And so that's a consideration. For those customers who need to do type 2, but it's not an immediate rush, and they want to get through that SOC process in a shorter time period, what we'll typically do is a type 1 examination in the near future. Then the customer will take advantage of that full 12-month allowable period of the type 2, which will then push the type 2 examination into the following budget cycle. So you're spreading out the costs a lot more over 2 years instead of a big gulp in that first year.
Thank you, Nick. Do the costs fluctuate at all for the industry that a company is embarking on? Can you pursue 2 or 3 compliance standards simultaneously to attempt to integrate some of the costs? What are some of those maybe alternative strategies companies try to leverage to wrap their heads around the costs?
Absolutely. Costs absolutely fluctuate significantly. Very similar to how the cost of a house, the end product fluctuates typically based on the size house, type of house, location of the house, etc. SOC 2 examinations are a service and a product, and they also, based on the complexity of the company, size of the company, etc., those costs can vary simply as well based on how much work that the auditor is going to be doing to perform that audit, the amount of risk that we're taking on.
Excellent. Monetary considerations are one part of the resources that companies have to devote to successfully passing an audit or embarking on an audit journey and embracing compliance. One of the other considerations is staff and expertise and time from employees. Once a company has successfully decided that this is a journey that they want to embark upon, how should they be thinking about rallying the troops, as it were, when it comes to ensuring that everyone on their team is kind of prepared to play their specific role, and or that they are prepared for the time allotment it will require to get it over the finish line? And I'd love to hear if you have specific roles that you see teams needing to add or develop or outsource or reallocate, as it were.
Absolutely. The major piece here is that this SOC process is being championed by someone who carries weight in the company. So a leader that is high visibility, and that those the other employees will respect and understand how important the initiative is. The other piece is just like whoever's leading the SOC process, them becoming educated through pursuing that SOC, the initial SOC. We want to be educating all other employees who are involved in what is SOC 2, why are we doing SOC 2, what's the SOC 2 process, what are expectations. And so we actually, when we bring on a new client, we will do a kickoff call with the company leadership, so our client leadership, as well as all employees who will have a hand in the process to actually perform the education. So help them understand what is SOC 2, how is it going to influence our company, what changes can we expect, what expectations are there during the audit process, what is the audit process, and really make sure that we're developing very good rapport with our clients, because this is a true partnership. Auditors want to help your organization become a better company, and we want to help make sure that you're getting there in a very succinct process between leadership and all the employees. So communication's key, obviously, with anything, and setting very realistic expectations throughout that process.
Thank you, Nick. you make it sound not as scary as it is in the minds of startup CEOs and business leaders. So I think that is really helpful. One of the elements and themes that we see often in terms of people trying to join the world of certified companies is that they're doing it because it's an external imposition and a standard in the sales process.
Yep.
That is the forcing function. And one of the themes, and I think this is a distinction of Geels Norton, is that you don't think that is the primary animating reason for kind of making this commitment. Is there, some tips you have on what steps you can take to get early ROI, even if you can't make the larger philosophical commitment to compliance all at once? Are there some baby steps, some early policies or documents, some early company culture that they can create to position them to kind of adopt compliance as a key value?
Absolutely, and it all starts with education, Kalani. It's exactly why we're involved with initiatives like this, to help companies start thinking about it sooner. So I always urge that if anyone has questions about what is SOC 2, when do we pursue it, what's the process, what are expectations, talk to people in the industry sooner than later. Talk to the Strike Graphs of the world, talk to the Geels Nortons of the world, and just say, what are we up against? What's the process here? We help a lot of clients way far before they actually want to pursue SOC 2. We will do mini consulting engagements with them to help them understand, where are we now, what's SOC 2 going to require of us, and what are those big changes that need to be made over the next year or so we can become in a very good position to actually address SOC 2 and become compliant with the SOC 2 initiatives. The other piece of that is culture. It's the company leadership developing a culture that embraces security from the start, that embraces operational efficiency and process in consistency, in risk management. This is all about identifying, assessing, and managing risk. That's really what SOC 2 is fundamentally. And so if we can help our employees understand that that's how we're approaching everything in our organization, then the company is going to be in a great spot to go through SOC 2 later on.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Nick. It looks like Michelle is still unable to access the platform. I did want to take a chance to have Sam Oberholzer, a new compliance expert who has joined StrikeGraph, an opportunity to kind of appear on the stage and kind of talk about the intersection between compliance and technology and kind of new trends. Sam doesn't know she's being put on the spot, so apologies in advance, Sam. While she is getting the invitation, one of the elements as we begin to wrap up that I think both you and Sam can begin to weigh in on is, what does the future look like? And what is going to impact how companies ought to be thinking about compliance? What new forms of compliance are going to be emerging? I think that the technology itself is going to have lots of implications. Sam, thank you so much for jumping in. Michelle said you were a compliance expert and that you could fill in, so we're so excited to have you. I'd love for you to go ahead and weigh in on kind of what the future looks like. What are the things people should be considering that they're not considering? What will be the role of weird technology like VR in this space? If I'm a new startup or a CEO, what's the hidden sauce that I should be thinking of?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, well, first of all, Nick, hi, I'm Sam.
Me too.
I'll just give you a quick background too. So I've been in the audit, I'm gonna go into a different room, Sorry, did not know I was going to be speaking. So I've been in the compliance audit realm for both public accounting and private CPA companies for the last 6 years. So I have seen I guess somewhat change, especially if we're talking about in the SOC 2 realm, just, recently from the 2018 updates when they included more around, your vendor management and your risk management for that. Everything that you've said is 100% true. We used to operate kind of in the realm of, understanding what the client wants. I think that was very important. If they just want a stamp of approval, which is, from what I handled, a lot, like at least 50% of my clientele over the past years, some of them just might not want to understand security on a value proposition realm. And they really just cared about, what their client wanted right there and then, and not the opportunity to actually learn and grow from that. Where I see compliance going, I definitely think that as of right now, SOC 2 compliance and ISO is not necessarily required, but I definitely feel like that's turning into a realm where more of our customers are going to push their customers once they start understanding the whole due diligence and the whole reason as to why we are performing this. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Nick. I know you've been talking a lot.
No, I
think
you're spot on. I think there's going to be changes in the way the audits are performed, and that's already changing fast. And
yep.
We love it. It allows us to spend more time from a consulting standpoint with our clients. Everything from platforms like StrikeGraph, who are finally helping companies better organize and consistently maintain control structures, to what we used to do a lot of testing manually, especially for cloud security concepts. We can now use technology to do automated scanning to gain complete assurance over security configs, things like that. What cannot be automated, though, is management functions and management strategy and vision. And I think that's way too often a discounted area of SOC 2. There's probably 50% of what the SOC 2 audit is security and technology. The other 50% is, how do you run your business? What is the culture? What are the values? How do you assess risk? To your point, all of these, we're outsourcing more than we're insourcing now. How do we manage all of those risks well? And what's interesting, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but Utah and Nevada have already passed. In the state of Connecticut is in legislation right now. They have passed legislation that if any organization, any company has pursued NIST 800-53, which is the NIST cybersecurity framework, and can prove implementation, or CIS, so the Center for Internet Security's their top 20 control framework. If companies have pursued and implemented in good faith those frameworks, then there is a safe harbor law that if there is an incident or data breach against them, then they are safe harbored from the risk there and from the liability there. And so I think that is going to be huge for, all of a sudden it brings compliance to a subset of organizations, to a certain set of compliance to all organizations. What's still lacking with just implementing those frameworks is that SOC 2 is a much more deeper dive into actually a third party attesting over other customers or other clients or companies' controls. Whereas just implementing a framework is a kind of a good step. But what I'm really hoping for is that as more and more states adopt legislation like this, it's going to allow us from the SOC 2 or compliance standpoint to help companies do SOC 2, but also demonstrate compliance with NIST or CIS. And so it's going to help them mitigate risk far beyond what's even currently happening.
Absolutely. And that you brought up the NIST cybersecurity framework. I actually do see that, more and more of my clients are using that type of framework, that, for even the SOC 2, obviously you still have to go with the requirements for SOC 2, but I can still see it moving more and more integrated, especially if we're talking about just strictly the risk assessment process of it.
Yeah, we have a client right now that they're just finishing up preparing for their first type 1, and they've actually built their security program on the NIST CSF, and there's mappings out there of SOC 2 to NIST CSF, and if you have a robust security program that aligns with the CSF, you are, don't quote me on this, but you're pretty darn close to go on SOC 2 compliance.
Yes, absolutely. I'm
going. Thank you both. I have some tactical questions that are in the question stream that I just noticed, and I do want to make sure I give you guys a few minutes to kind of give people some tactical guidance. So if you are the leader of a company and you have multiple products, how should you be thinking about your scope for SOC 2? Do you need a separate audit and an auditor for each product? You need, what would that look like?
Go ahead, Sam, if you want to.
Yeah, so it really depends on the services. For at least a standpoint for me, I guess I always break it down to again, it starts with the value to what the client wants. If they're looking for the lowest costly report, a lot of the times they will, put all the products into one report. However, that may not necessarily be the best pathway, especially if, the different products do different services, if they attend to different customers. And then ultimately, if the products aren't looked at separately in a full scope, you might be getting gaps, you might be seeing exceptions. And so a lot of the times I always break it down to what are the services that the products do and how do they interact with each other. And I always start from that standpoint, because when I see a report that's massive with a bunch of different products, a lot of the value might be lost in it.
Excellent, thank you. We keep seeing cybersecurity breaches populate every news cycle, and there isn't a platform that hasn't been affected. And so how is that incorporated into my compliance strategy? Is it relevant for a cloud environment, and how so? And where does multi-factor authentication fit in?
I'll take a stab at kind of high level there. I think a key piece to keep in mind with any compliance initiative or any cybersecurity initiative is its risk mitigation and risk reduction. I always say it's not an if, it's a when, as far as some incidents probably going to occur, but the goal is to understand what are those risks and how do we actually address and mitigate those to an area or level that we're comfortable with. You can spend millions and millions of dollars on cybersecurity tactics and still have holes. And so it's never going to be a full, well, there's one way to do it. You don't click to the internet, and you can, that's going to reduce a lot of risk, but that's not going to be very functional for the operations of your organization. The use of the cloud and cloud service providers, certainly they can help manage risk, but what you are now doing is you're not transferring the risk from you to them. You're now sharing the risk with them. So for example, if you're outsourcing to a SaaS provider or any other vendor, it's your responsibility to understand that if that vendor gets breached or hacked or goes down and your customer's data is there, you're still responsible for selecting them and for any implications of what happens with that data, because you are the controller or processor of that data. And so understand when you do outsource or do use any cloud service providers, what are they doing to help protect the data? Are their standards at your level or higher? And so you can trust them, and make sure you know what you're getting into. And there fortunately are some really good CSPs out there, cloud service providers out there, that take security very, very seriously, which is good for organizations who are smaller and don't have the resources there. And so it can certainly be in addition. The MFA question, that is a key piece to to user access and logical access security risks. If a cloud service provider is being used, then we will always recommend and require that MFA is enforced to get to that cloud service provider, because local area networks are no longer a thing really. So you're putting way too much risk in being able to access these cloud products from anything that's connected to the internet. But in addition to MFA, there's hundreds of other control activities that we would recommend implement to help manage and mitigate those risks.
Sam, did you have any things that you wanted to add on that point?
No, because to Nick's point, I think he hit a lot of good points with that. It really is about understanding who is managing the risk, where the risk resides, and to his point, if you are having a third-party vendor that you rely on a lot of the control areas or any big areas, it's very important to still monitor that, monitor their activity. And there are, a subset of controls that you can look at to really get that comfort. And then also to your point, I did have a lot of clients in the past that if they do outsource a certain area and they take an attestation report from a cloud service provider, they just automatically think that all of the controls are theirs, and they don't need to do anything anymore. There's no accountability on the client, and that is not the case at all. Right. If anything, really, the big areas like physical, environmental might be something not in your ballpark, but it really is a shared. It's a shared responsibility and shared accountability. So you still need to do a full circle of testing and filling in those gaps. So I think monitoring is a huge point that that companies tend to miss from small to enterprise.
I really appreciate you flagging that, Sam. It does beg a follow-up question, which is, are there a universe of things that are passed through compliance? Are there a universe of things that I can outsource to my vendor's compliance posture? Or is that completely an illusion?
So there's, I guess, yes and no, and it's different. It's really different per environment. There's a set of control areas or criteria requirements that would be more typical and more common. For instance, if you do have a cloud, service provider, or co-location, typically if you have that as your vendor, so like your data centers, you would typically kind of carve out physical, environmental, but also still monitor. In a sense, there's always still a partnership of either gathering their attestation report or either doing on-site visits. So, no matter what, I feel like there still is a partnership, unless I'm trying to think, unless the biggest thing I can think of that you might completely carve out might be like vended applications, but it really depends on what requirement and what attestation you're truly trying to get. It's a very
very broad, right?
Yeah, until you narrow it down to the industry, to its environment, to contractors, to Nick, I don't know if you have any input with that, but
I think you were spot on with your prior response too, with the Microsoft, so for Azure, for AWS, for GCP, they all publish these shared responsibility models, which outline what the CSP is responsible for, what the shared responsibility is for, and what's fully on the user still. And so, like if it's a platform as a service, for example, we'll know that the platform is going to be managing things like antivirus on those compute devices, or patching, or things like that. But if you're using like an Amazon EC2 instance, you're still responsible for all of that stuff.
Correct.
And so I think that's when there's questions around that stuff, involve prospective auditors or involve the strike graphs to ask those questions on, here's what we do. What the heck is the scope of our SOC 2? Because we don't know where to start. And then we can help you kind of pick away the layers there and understand your responsibilities.
Yeah, and to your point too, so Azure is an interesting one because the three services, so infrastructure, platform, application. So I think it's very important too, because a lot of the times I see that small companies, when they're just, anybody, I guess, majority small companies, when they are migrating to the cloud, a lot of times they don't even know the difference between each service. So I think it's even tailoring it back to, sometimes they might come in early. So where StrikeCraft can come in, if it's really in the beginning stages, that's where even those conversations open up to see if they even have resources to fill in where, Azure might be able to your point with the firewalls that we would carve out and put to the responsibility of them. So it really is a partnership, before it gets to the auditor firm that actually assesses the controls.
Absolutely.
For some companies, everything is outsourced. Their entire IT team, DevOps, all of their developers, just kind of everybody who's not maybe on the business side. If that's the case and they don't really have SOC 2 in their country, or they don't have SOC 2 as a company, if they have completely different standards, how do I ensure that they are a trustworthy vendor that I should be doing business with? And is there some obligation on my end to get them up to speed, as it were?
Honestly, when I think of companies like that, I tend to think of consulting companies where they're mostly just managed services. And so but a lot of the areas would be carved out. So you either go on if I'm a consulting company, I go to my client's environment, I use their entire environment, so they're responsible for it. So, and then if you're saying on the IT portion, so everything on the back end, it's all carved out. I think me as a company, I would have to have that conversation with my major critical vendors to see if they have attestation reports, because a SOC 2 would still be relevant, because you would still test those entity level, your management level controls, your whole risk assessment process and vendor assessment process. So there's still a lot of value that comes from a attestation report, even if everything's carved out. It's just having that conversation to see, again, where the responsibility lies and where you need to have those conversations to see that people actually are doing that other companies are doing their due diligence the same way you're expected to.
Excellent. Are there questions that we haven't asked that we should have asked? Sometimes I know that what's top of mind for the business leaders is not necessarily what's top of mind for the experts. So if there are certain questions that you think we should have asked or that should have been addressed, I'd love to hear some of those.
Yeah. I just want to open up this conversation again. I know you asked a question of where do you see, I guess, the requirements going, but more on a technology base. So Nick, I'd be interested to get where you see. So, 2018, we just had an upgrade to the 2017 TSPs. So I'm actually interested in how we added in more value on vendor assessments, more value on just the whole risk assessment process.
Yeah.
Where do you, I don't foresee another update coming soon, but at least for the next couple of years from my standpoint. But where is your head kind of at in that process and where you see that's going?
Yeah, I think that is a super question. I think that the current framework probably is not going to change in the near future. What we have taken with that is to meet the minimum basic SOC 2 compliance requirements is one level. Compliance in no way equals security. And so the way that we approach all these engagements is, okay, you guys are doing these basic 5 practices. Have you considered these 25 things that AWS recommends, that CIS recommends, that NIST recommends? So we're spending half of our engagements not even on SOC 2 requirements, but on helping these folks actually address risks that they're not thinking about. Or to your point, the vendor management side. Yes, great. You've got a documented program. You've obtained SOC 2s for your higher risk vendors. What are you actually doing with them? Do you guys understand how to review them? What are the key pieces to pick apart? How are we doing risk management? Like, there's so much deeper value that can be provided there beyond just saying, yes, you meet this requirement. And I think that's where the industry can go and should go. That's where the value is. That's also where companies going through SOC 2 are going to actually get value out of it. The value of the SOC 2 reports can help them get some customers, etc. But to your point, there's so much more there than just checking off that compliance box.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I think compliance is a nice umbrella. But what I would like to see is, stop trying to force different companies, different industries into the same buckets. And that's why I do like all the different principles, or I guess guidelines, that AWS or Azure is pushing out on a security basis. And I would love to see more of that being implemented into these compliance, certification, attestation reports.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting, there's been zero traction on this, but one thing that audit firms can do and that companies can adopt is you can do SOC 2 plus engagements, they're called. So you can follow the SOC 2 framework and standards and add to the criteria being evaluated other frameworks. So, NIST stuff or HIPAA or CIS, which is a fantastic way to be evaluated over more stringent requirements and criteria, and B, especially like for cloud, hit the CSA, include CSA in your SOC 2. That's going to show so much more for a cloud-based company in their compliance initiatives than just a SOC 2 would. So I wouldn't be surprised if more and more companies start adopting that. I've already seen, even the past year, we saw a dip or an increase in companies who wanted SOC 2 fast, quick, and cheap. And it's been like a year and a half, probably, curved down. We're seeing that evolve fast. People are now saying, oh, this is so much more than just compliance. This can actually help us become a better company. We need a scalable platform, strategy, etc. And we're seeing it come back up where more and more companies are saying, you know what? Yes, we see the value. We want to pay more money for a better experience, better service, and they're focused on actually putting in really good controls, which is fantastic.
Yeah, just talking about recent trends too, especially with the pandemic too, and a lot of companies using that to migrate to the cloud. I definitely think that what's going to come, because I guess over the past years, people are like, SOC 2 running around, we need to get a SOC 2 without really even realizing what it is. Yeah. So I think that time is hopefully going to start slowing down, so people can start, educating, getting a little bit more informative on that. Yeah. And then to your point too, move to CSA, because, just thinking about how that's so crucial now that moving to the cloud is just a little bit safer now that everyone's so virtual too. Just moving towards that certification and having a little bit more understanding on a security basis, and not just getting a stamp of approval.
Yeah.
What does the future of compliance look like when we're not using screens and people are in virtual reality and augmented reality? And the reason I ask is because I am on the board of a startup, and they have meetings and do business and make verbal contracts in the virtual world. And there's no record of, that conversation, that interaction, or et cetera.
It's all understanding scope. It's what are your risks? We're working with a VR company right now, and they even provide headsets to their clients with piece of their applications loaded on there. And so understanding, okay, what's the risk there? Is there any data there? How is data transferred from the headset back to the actual core app in AWS? And so that's, I think, actually a pretty easy transition, Kalani, compared to 10 years ago. The cloud was very, very, very rare. All of our clients had on-premise systems, their own data centers, or they were housing their own managed infrastructure in third-party data centers. That has changed tremendously over the past decade. So that shift, I think, has been the most monumental. With what you're saying, the AR, VR, those are the same services, just offered on the cloud in a different manner.
That's relieving to hear, because it means that the newest technologies that are on the horizon from a business integration standpoint are going to fall into current compliance philosophies, et cetera.
I'll give a caveat there. I think that privacy-related implications are going to be increasing a lot more than anything else, because now that you're handling that data in different ways, and with increase in privacy law expectation, that's privacy is a hot topic. It's not going away.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's interesting. It would be interesting to see how those requirements kind of expand, and I guess just get more, I guess, in lack of better words, more required for companies to actually include that in the scope of their compliance or certification. Just because besides your different privacy shield or GDPR, I actually, if we're bringing it back to SOC 2, I actually don't see that as much included in scope. So that'd be interesting to see how that kind of pans out as we evolve, I guess, in technology.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for the very fruitful responses and insights that you've shared. Do you have some closing comments, kind of guiding new executives and leaders through some key considerations or pitfalls, some very last thoughts to leave them with?
Go ahead, Sam.
Okay. I really think the biggest thing is, to I guess try to be involved and try to understand as much as you can. It's not easy. And if you are in upper management of your company that you're running, I think being involved in those conversations and not just at high level even, and not just relying or trying to outsource everything, it will help just you in your decisions on a security, privacy, confidentiality, all of that basis. And then on top of that, I think it just helps entity level and helps drive, your consumption, and then also drive your conversations with your vendors, your clients. So I think it is a snowball effect, and kind of leading with example and not trying to escape it. And kind of, either outsourcing or putting on somebody else will help in this world, because it's only going to increase.
Sam, I'm just going to echo you. Leadership needs to embrace this process. Mm-hmm. And I think the other piece of that is don't go it alone. There are so many resources out there that are here to help you. Take advantage of them. We'll tell even prospects that we know will not be a good fit for us. We are always here to help them navigate the process. And so there's plenty of folks in this industry that want to educate, want to help, and want to see you succeed.
It's funny. I truly stand by this point too. I feel like a majority of assessors or people in compliance or security, we love to talk about this and coach through it and educate. So if you're willing to learn and not just want that stamp of approval and show, we'll take our time to actually help.
Sam, pleasure to meet you.
Nick, it was a pleasure meeting you. You know, this was fun. I'm not gonna lie, I was like, whoa, I got
Thanks for being such a great sport. I'm gonna make sure that we get the next one on the calendar. I think this will be a very helpful series because it's a really complex topic, and both of you have done a great job of making it digestible and intelligible. Sam, thank you for being such a good sport. Nick, thank you for leading so much of the conversation in the early part of the webinar. I will go ahead and send out a permanent video link that everyone can access. But Nick and Sam, looking very much forward to having you guys on again to give us your expertise on all things compliance and audit related.
Claudia, thank you so much. Our pleasure.
Have a great day.
Nick, it was great meeting you. I look forward to discussing with you in the future.
Sam, likewise. We'll connect.